Have you ever felt that irrational force pushing you forward, even when everything screams at you to stop and reconsider? That stubbornness that makes you stick to a path, no matter how steep or wrong it seems. It's a powerful, almost wild energy that lives within us. And, believe it or not, it has a fascinating mirror in the animal kingdom. Get ready to dive into the mind of one of nature's most imposing animals to uncover why sometimes we act like a bull on charge, blind, focused, and incredibly stubborn. Blind stubbornness goes far beyond mere persistence or strong will. It has a deeply rooted emotional and behavioral state where unwavering resistance to change and an obstinate refusal to reconsider a position becomes so dominant that they suppress logic, reason, and at times, even the instinct for self-preservation. It's not the admirable resilience that propels us to overcome challenges with focus and dedication, but rather an irrational obstinacy that keeps us chained to a detrimental course of action, even when evidence mounts and sensible advice pleads for a detour. It's the stark difference between being determined and being self-destructive. Consider the leader who insists on a clearly failing business strategy, despite unfavorable financial reports, market analyses pointing to its unviability, and growing team demoralization. They refuse to pivot, to acknowledge the need for a new approach, or to abandon the initial plan purely out of pride or a blind conviction in their own vision that has become obsolete. This stubbornness isn't just a lapse in judgment. It becomes an insurmountable barrier to growth, stifling innovation, leading to significant losses, and ultimately dragging the organization toward failure. How many companies have crumbled because founders or directors refuse to change course? Consider the countless everyday situations where this stubbornness manifests with painful clarity, sometimes even comically, were it not for the tragic outcomes. Perhaps you've been caught in that endless family argument where, exhausted, you cling to a point of view not out of genuine conviction, but because the idea of yielding or admitting a mistake feels like an unbearable defeat for your ego. You find yourself repeating the same tired arguments, ignoring the emotional toll on others and the weariness that consumes you, all just to win a debate whose original purpose has long been lost in the fog of inflexibility. This fixation on a position, even when devoid of meaning, is a classic symptom of blind stubbornness in action. In the professional environment, this obstinacy can be equally corrosive and fatal to progress. In interpersonal relationships, blind stubbornness can be particularly devastating and heart-wrenching. How many people persist in abusive or toxic relationships, clinging to the illusion that their partner will change, or that love conquers all, while ignoring the repetitive cycles of pain, constant disrespect, and ongoing suffering inflicted upon them? They remain trapped by misguided loyalty, a paralyzing fear of the unknown, and a glaring inability to recognize that their obstinacy in maintaining the bond is, in fact, destroying their self-esteem, mental health, and emotional well-being. It's this persistent stubbornness that prevents liberation, keeping them shackled in a self-imposed captivity. At its deepest core, blind stubbornness is a sophisticated form of self-sabotage. It builds invisible walls that prevent us from embracing new perspectives, from learning constructively from our own mistakes, and from adapting to the constantly and rapidly changing dynamics of life. It's like having your eyes blindfolded in the middle of a raging storm, insisting on walking in a straight line without considering that the direction might lead to an abyss, an insoluble impasse, or unnecessary and avoidable suffering. The mental rigidity that accompanies blind stubbornness robs us of the vital capacity to see alternatives, to heed the voice of prudence, and to recognize that, at times, the greatest strength and true intelligence lie in the ability to change course, to pivot, to retreat in order to advance more effectively, recognizing and with courage disarming this darker facet of. Persistence is the first and most crucial step toward freeing ourselves from its shackles and cultivating a form of resilience that is, in fact, intelligent, flexible, and oriented toward genuine well-being. To capture the essence of blind stubbornness in its most primal, instinctive, and undeniable form, there is no more powerful and visually impactful archetype than that of a charging bull. Visualize the scene in your mind with vivid detail. A colossal mass of pure strength and muscle with taut. It doesn't deviate from its course easily, shows no hesitation, and remarkably, appears not to even register minor obstacles or environmental elements that might suggest an alternative route, a strategic retreat, or even a simple change in tactics. Its focus is singular, absolute, and overwhelming, driven by a primal impulse of dominance, defense, and overcoming. Whether in the arena facing a matador, in vast open fields, confronting a rival in a dispute for territory or females, or even in a flight, response the bull's determination is to push forward with an almost mesmerizing ferocity, an obstinacy that borders on irrationality for an external observer. Rippling muscles beneath its dark, gleaming hide, and those imposing horns that seem sculpted by nature itself for impact and dominance. When a bull decides to initiate an attack, whether to defend its territory, confront a rival, or respond to a provocation in the arena, it transforms into an unstoppable force of nature. Its head lowers, its eyes fixed with a laser-like intensity on the target, and then it surges forward with a speed, weight, and momentum that seem to defy any physical or logical barrier in its path. The most striking and terrifying characteristic of the bull's charge is its absolute relentlessness. Bulls are inherently territorial animals, endowed with a sharp protective instinct for their herd and their vital space. This determination, pushed to the extreme of fanaticism, is what elevates the charging bull to the status of a perfect mirror for our own blind stubbornness. It is the vivid image of a powerful force that, once unleashed, seems incapable of being stopped, diverted, or altered in its trajectory, no matter the cost. This selective blindness to alternatives and this fierce, unconditional devotion to a chosen path, no matter how ineffective, dangerous, or even self-destructive it proves to be, echoes so deeply and, at times, so uncomfortably in stubborn human behavior. The bull, in this metaphorical context, is not just an animal. It becomes the personification of the idea that, in certain critical moments of life, pure brute force and an inflexible determination can lead us down a path of no return, blinding us to the subtlety, adaptability, and intelligence that modern life demands for true success, well-being, and evolution. In their natural environment, be it an open, boundless pasture or a confined, artificial corral, assertiveness and the demonstration of force are essential behaviors for establishing hierarchy, intimidating threats, and ensuring the group's safety. When they feel threatened, provoked, or challenged, their instinctive and primary response is a direct, powerful, and overwhelming charge. They rely entirely on their immense body mass, the devastating power of their charge, and the sharpness of their horns to overcome or destroy anything that stands in their way. There is no room for negotiation, for measured risk analysis, or for planned detours amidst the momentum. There is only the resolute and overwhelming advance toward what has been rigidly determined as the ultimate objective. This single-minded persistence. The link between the bull's relentless charge and human blind stubbornness is more than a mere poetic analogy or literary device. It reveals instinctive and emotional behavioral patterns that manifest in surprisingly similar and universal ways in both species, despite the singular complexity of the human intellect. Just as the bull lowers its heavy head and charges with a singular, unwavering focus, eyes locked on its target, we in our moments of blind stubbornness also vehemently refuse to lift our heads and survey the vast landscape of possibilities, alternative realities, and new information around us. We become so obsessed and absorbed in our target, be it a fixed and irrefutable argument, an unyielding idea, an inflexible plan of action, or a strategy that clearly proves ineffective, that we are utterly incapable of perceiving impending pitfalls, smarter detours, escape routes, or new doors opening before us, while others, once promising, irrevocably and permanently close behind us. Consider the vivid example of the individual who, in a heated discussion or debate, continues to hammer the same point with exhaustive insistence, repeating the same tired arguments, even when all objective evidence contradicts them and the interlocutor has already given up the conversation, exhausted. This person is no longer arguing to convince, to seek truth, or to engage in dialogue. They are fighting with all their might to reaffirm their own position, their own inflexible truth, no matter how unsustainable it may be. This is precisely like the bull that, once engaged in a charge, cannot easily stop its momentum or change direction, even if the target suddenly moves or an insurmountable obstacle stands in its way. The inertia of the decision already made, the emotional and mental energy already invested in that course of action, make any suggestion of changing course seem almost unthinkable, a betrayal of one's own conviction, no matter how loudly external reality screams that this is the only sensible option for survival or success. The human mind, in this state of blind stubbornness, operates with a singular and distorted logic, that of not yielding ground, not retreating, not admitting error, not losing the investment already made, regardless of personal cost or consequences. For our brain, admitting a mistake, there is a strong component linked to our ego and the construction of our identity and self-image. Changing our mind, publicly admitting that we were wrong, or yielding a position can be perceived as a direct threat to our self-esteem, our competence, our reputation, and our social status. Our primitive brain, which still heavily influences our behavior and is linked to our survival and position within a social group, often associates being right with security, intelligence, acceptance, and recognition. Giving in or retreating can be mistakenly interpreted by ourselves and by others as a sign of weakness, indecision, inconsistency, or lack of conviction, thus maintaining stubbornness, even in an irrational and self-destructive way, can be an unconscious and automatic strategy to protect our self-perception of infallibility, to maintain the coherence of our personal narrative about who we are, and to avoid the dreaded and uncomfortable cognitive dissonance. It is a complex and fascinating dance between emotion, cognition, and biology that prevents us from seeing clarity, truth, and better solutions when blind stubbornness takes control, transforming the virtue of persistence into a debilitating and, at times, devastating mental trap. Reversing a decision and abandoning a previous investment is perceived as a painful loss, a form of failure, and our reward and punishment system, governed by complex neural networks, powerfully pushes us to avoid this feeling of loss at all costs. This is analogous to the bull that, once engaged in its charge and having expended so much energy, instinctively reluctant to stop or deviate, because stopping would mean that all its momentum and effort were wasted without achieving the ultimate goal. In addition to these cognitive biases and the sunk cost fallacy, blind stubbornness is not an abstract concept confined to psychology textbooks. It pulses in daily life, manifesting in actions and decisions that transform ordinary people into genuine bulls in their irrational charges, with tangible and, at times, painful consequences. Through short stories and vivid scenarios, we can recognize how this behavior traps us in cycles of inefficiency, frustration, and, regrettably, detriment. Meet Ricardo, the entrepreneur with the brilliant idea that became a burden. He had invested all his savings, his inheritance, and years of hard work and exclusive dedication into creating an innovative application for a specific market niche. She knew, deep in her soul and in her moments of clarity, that her partner was manipulative, controlling, and that the relationship was emotionally and physically draining her. At launch, the initial usage data was disheartening. Users weren't engaging. The interface was too complex for the target audience, and the problem the app aimed to solve already had simpler, established solutions in the market. Experienced consultants, potential investors, and even his closest development team suggested a radical pivot, drastically changing the product's direction, adapting the technology for another niche, or even abandoning it and starting something completely new. But Ricardo, with a blind obstinacy worthy of a raging bull on a charge, adamantly refused to listen. "My vision is ahead of its time," he insisted repeatedly, with a fanatic gleam in his eyes, ignoring mounting losses, accumulated debts, and the visible exhaustion of his team. He persisted, convinced that success would come from his unwavering insistence, and ultimately led the startup to total bankruptcy, losing not only his financial investment but also his reputation, the trust of everyone who believed in him, and precious years of his life. His stubbornness in sticking to his original course prevented him from seeing a new and promising path that might have been right beside him, waiting to be explored. Or observe the painful trajectory of Sophia, trapped in a chronically toxic relationship. Concerned friends and family pointed out the clear signs of emotional abuse, offering a safe haven and unconditional support for her to leave the situation. But Sophia, with an almost inexplicable and painful stubbornness to witness, desperately clung to the idealized memory of past good times and the irrational belief that he would change if I tried harder, or that true love conquers all. She continued to invest emotionally and to overgive, ignoring the warnings of reason, believing that her dedication and patience would eventually bring the desired transformation in her partner. Her blind stubbornness kept her trapped in a vicious and repetitive cycle of pain, disappointment, and self-annihilation, unable to deviate from what was clearly detrimental to her own mental, emotional, and physical health. Consider, too, the classic and universal scene of the father on a family vacation road trip, a situation many have experienced or witnessed. He vehemently refuses to consult the car's GPS or accept the suggestions for more efficient and faster routes from his wife and children. Convinced that he knows this road like the back of his hand, or that technology isn't always right, he insists on taking a secondary road, famous for being more scenic, even when the radio announces traffic jams and the navigation app shows a 30-minute detour via a fast, clear highway. He presses on, stubborn, ignoring the growing complaints and visible boredom in the car, until he realizes too late that he is stuck in a miles-long traffic jam, adding unnecessary hours to the trip and transforming what should have been an enjoyable outing into an exhausting and frustrating experience for everyone. His inflexible stubbornness in admitting a mistake or simply following a new direction led him down a demonstrably worse course of action, compromising the family's well-being. These vivid examples drawn from everyday life powerfully demonstrate how blind stubbornness, much like the inflexible and determined charge of a bull, propels us in one direction with overwhelming force, but not always to our own benefit or the benefit of those around us. It traps us in behavioral patterns that repeatedly causes pain, loss, frustration, and stagnation, simply because the idea of changing course, of stopping the charge and considering another option, is perceived as more difficult, more costly, or more threatening than continuing straight ahead, even if it means walking directly into a cliff or a dead end. Understanding blind stubbornness through the visceral and impactful image of the charging bull is not merely an intellectual exercise to point out flaws or blame ourselves for our imperfections. It is, above all, a profound and transformative opportunity for self-knowledge, personal growth, and ultimately, liberation. The primary and most powerful lesson the bull's behavior reveals to us is that strength, focus, and determination are absolutely incredible and indispensable qualities, often keys to success. However, they become dangerous and even destructive when unaccompanied by the wisdom of flexibility and the capacity for adaptation. The bull in its charge advances with brute force and a singular purpose, But we human beings are endowed with a unique and sophisticated capacity, that of stopping analyzing the complex scenario, reevaluating our choices with discernment, and crucially, having the intelligence and courage to change course when reality demands it. The reflection that arises then is intimate, powerful, and deeply personal. How much of a bull have you been in your own life? In what areas of your existence have you charged blindly, head down and eyes fixed on a single point, ignoring the persistent warning signs life gives you? The sensible advice from those who genuinely care about you, or even that subtle inner voice of your own intuition that cries out for a pause, a detour, or a fundamental reconsideration. Life, unlike a straight-line race where unwavering persistence always pays off, is a journey filled with unexpected turns, unpredictable detours, challenges that demand creativity. And at times, it requires a strategic retreat so that we can, in fact, move forward more effectively, more fully, and with less suffering. Blind persistence is not always a virtue. Sometimes it proves to be the insurmountable obstacle itself. We can learn a great deal to develop the peripheral of our inner bull. This means cultivating active and empathetic listening, not just to what others say with words, but also to what reality itself shows us through tangible results, unintended consequences, and the feelings we experience. It is the innate ability to learn from experience, to evolve constantly, to proactively and intelligently adjust to new information and to circumstances that change ceaselessly. Inspiring change within ourselves is about cultivating curiosity and openness instead of absolute and inflexible certainty. What would happen if you paused for a moment, lifted your head, looked around with a truly open mind, honestly evaluated the evidence, and allowed yourself a new perspective, a new route, a new approach? Perhaps the best path to success, lasting happiness, or inner peace is not the one you stubbornly carved out and insist on charging down, but rather a path that only reveals itself when you take your eyes off your fixed target, abandon your stubbornness, and allow yourself to see beyond your own obstinacy. True self-knowledge and mastery over ourselves begin by recognizing the innate power of our most primal instincts and with consciousness, courage, and wisdom, deciding whether we will be blindly controlled by them or whether we will control and direct them for the benefit of a more flexible, more promising, and above all, truly free and conscious future. It means being genuinely open to constructive feedback, even if it challenges our deepest convictions or forces us to confront our own mistakes, which is always uncomfortable but essential for growth. It's about having the courage to question our own beliefs and decisions, especially when they repeatedly cause us pain, stagnation, loss, or prevent us from achieving desired results and genuine well-being. And, crucially, it's about being able to recognize when we are clinging to an idea, a relationship, a project, a habit, or a path, not out of rational conviction or effectiveness, but merely out of wounded pride, the paralyzing fear of failure or the unknown, or the seductive illusion of sunk costs that chain us to the past and to what has already been invested. The humility to reconsider a position or a plan is, in no way, a sign of weakness, indecision, or lack of character. It is, in fact, one of the highest and most powerful forms of emotional intelligence, adaptability, and wisdom.